Welcome to this episode of Untold Secrets of Living Overseas. And I'm so excited for y'all to listen to this because I'm with Bill Whirty and he wrote a book. Hey, Bill,
Hello, how are
good to
you?
have you today.
Great to be
He
here.
he wrote a book that I think is going to help all of y'all that are interested. Yeah, and he's holding it up right now.
Shameless
So
plug.
cool. Hashtag life goals. He's basically, this is going to really help those of you who want to get citizenship by descent because he successfully got his Italian passport, which means that he can live in any country in the EU and he could bring his spouse or his partner. If he had kids, he could bring them. So there's so many people that want to do this. And I know there's a lot of you listening that potentially have ancestors that come from these European countries. Today, we're going to talk more about his book and what he shares to people so that they can actually do this on their own. And it's actually specifically Italy citizenship by descent. So, how to get your Italian citizenship by descent. And let me give you a proper intro, Bill.
Yeah.
So, Bill was born and raised on the south side of Chicago, love Chicago, and studied directing and screenwriting at Columbia College. And he's a writer and director. He now lives in LA and he shoots movies. And so it's kind of funny, Bill, because I'm like, wait a second. If somebody listens to your bio, you're like, wait, how did you get into this whole world of like helping people learn how to get citizenship by descent? So could you kind of tell us a little bit more about that journey and kind of like give us a little backstory of how you started to write this book to help people?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess it kind of goes back to growing up in Chicago, like on the South Side. It's an Irish neighborhood. Shout out to Beverly. And everyone there, for the most part, is Irish. And I'm part Irish as well. And everyone, it's kind of a thing that people just do is get their Irish citizenship. And for Ireland, though, you can only go back as far as your parents or your grandparents. And I couldn't find any info that, my grandparents were born here. And beyond that, like, it didn't really apply to me. So I was always kind of bummed. I was like, oh man, I can't like do that. And I never even thought to look into any of the other ones because no one was talking about it until this was like a couple years ago during the pandemic or towards the end of it. One of my side jobs that I was working with an interior designer. We were doing home stagings, and I was working with the other ladies, and we kind of started talking about the €1 homes. And I was like, oh yeah, those are great. Wouldn't it be awesome? And I kind of did some research into them, and like they need a lot of work. They're not just like these ready to go €1 homes. They're like crumbling masses that you have to put a lot of work into.
Yeah.
And yeah, and then like one of them mentioned, yeah, during the pandemic, all these Americans were getting their citizenship because they're sitting around doing nothing. And I was like, wait, I'm sitting around doing nothing. Wait, why don't I do this? I need to like look into this. So I started kind of digging and just doing research on the sites to see like, am I eligible? I was talking to my mom, like, hey, like your grandparents were born over there, like what's their birthdays? What's this? And she's like, I don't know. Call your Aunt Kathy. She has everything. So I called my aunt. Everyone's got that one like aunt or uncle that like just knows the entire family history. So
Yes.
I sat on the phone with her for like 2 or 3 hours, and she just kind of laid out the info. She emailed me from one of the family like picnics. They do this Falconera Fest in Chicago because we're from Falconera, Albanese. Um, and they do this fest, and they had this like family tree that like someone was passing around. So she sent me a copy of that. So they gave me the dates, which I found some of them were off. In typical, kind of Italian fashion, I was telling my aunt, I'm like, oh, I found some documents like this birthday is wrong. She's like, no, no, that's not the birth. No, your grandma was born on this day. I'm like, well, I'm holding her original Italian birth certificate and it says it's this day, but
Oh,
okay. But yeah, so yeah, basically that's where I started was like starting to talk to family members, getting as much information as I could up front. And then I tried to build years ago, like on ancestry.com, I tried to build a family tree and I just didn't have enough info. And it was just kind of, there wasn't a lot of info even out there. But now they have all these crazy tools. It was like recommending people, like just from other family trees. It would go, hey, if this person is your grandpa, this might be his parents and stuff. So you can check the names and, oh yeah, they match. So it'll add to your tree. So it's kind of like, I don't want to say it's AI because this has been doing this for a while, but it's, I'm sure it's some sort of algorithm. It's just
yeah.
pulling information. So yeah, so like that was kind of like the forefront. And again, I'm always trying to do stuff on the cheap, which is the whole point of the book of doing it yourself versus paying someone $5,000, $10,000 to go do all these documents for you. My motto is sort of like you can either afford one of two things. You can either afford to pay for stuff with your money or your time. And I didn't have any money, so I was like, I got time though. So I'm going to put my time into it and try to dig up these documents, see what I can do. So my goal was build this family tree on the 2 week free trial on Ancestry. Let me see, like, gather as much information as I could, got everything together, and then knocked it out like in less than the 2 weeks. I was able to just like trace it back and go, okay, everything I'm looking at here says that I'm still eligible for Italian citizenship. So I was ready to move to the next stage. Now, just
Wow.
having Italian relatives doesn't mean you're eligible because it's not about genealogy. You can't just 23andMe and go, oh, look, I'm Italian. It's all about the actual citizenship getting passed down the bloodline. So you
Okay.
have to make sure that like there was never any sort of break in the citizenship getting handed down. And there's a lot of caveats with Italy. So there's all these checkpoints where I was like, oh, I might not be eligible. Oh no, because of this law, I am eligible. And so we can get into some of that if you'd like. But
Yeah.
a
Well, the
lot
thing
of
that I found so interesting when we chatted before was you were telling me how you started learning how to do this on your own, obviously because you didn't want to cough up, 5 to 18K is what I'm seeing a lot of these lawyers charge people. And it's like
yeah, it's probably going
ridiculous
up since the
because
election too.
yes, it's gonna go up for sure. I'm getting my citizenship by descent through Czech Republic, through my
Nice.
grandfather, who's actually deceased. So there's a lot of things you were collecting in this process, and you had like Google Docs, and then people were coming to you, and you were like sending them your guide, and then you were like, oh wait, I should just create a book on this, right?
Yeah, yeah, pretty much like as I was gathering all my notes in just like a Google Doc, I had a couple of friends who were also interested, and I like would email them like first it was just an email, and I was like, hey, here's the basic notes. These are the websites. Go here, check and see if you're eligible. Like trace your bloodline, and then I would add stuff to a Google Doc, and then I'd reach out to them again. I'm like, hey, I got more information, but it's too big for an email. Here's the link to the Google Doc. And then one of my buddies more recently was asking me about it, and I sent it to him, and he's like, "Dude, this is like really long. This is like a whole book." I'm like, "Yeah, I want to do it as a book at some point. I just don't have the time." And I was like, "Wait, I do have the time. Why don't I just sit and kind of flesh this out?" And my main goal with that was, I really wanted to provide a lot of value with it in like a really, a nice solid book. I like getting like a good solid book. Like you can see this one, it's like 225 pages.
That's good.
Most of the other ones I've
Good
seen
length.
online were only like 80 pages and it just covered citizenship. So I'm like, let me flesh this thing out and let me add some stuff about how do you move to Italy? What is the process for getting health insurance? How do you do taxes there? Do you still owe taxes in the US? Like, what if my spouse wants to become a citizen? So I added, it's basically 3 sections and each section covers a different part of the process. So I wanted to just put as much stuff on top of that as possible.
Wow.
So yeah, I really kind of get into the nitty gritty. Like I even did a chapter on like, how would I move my dog over there? Like, can't go without him. So like, what is the process for getting a dog from the US, over to Europe?
Wow.
I just try
Yeah.
to
So
cover
for
stuff
those of
that
you that are curious, we'll put in the show notes how a link so you can get that book from Amazon. It's called The Complete Italian Dual Citizenship Handbook. Yep, that's it. So, okay, I have so many juicy questions that have actually come from some of my students. So, okay, let's dive in. So, you kind of told us your story about it. But why did you do it? Like, I know you said it was COVID, but like, were there more reasons of why you wanted to get your citizenship? I know you're still living in the US. Like, do you plan on moving to Italy and kind of like what was your plan behind it?
Yeah, originally it was just like I thought A would be cool. I'm like, you never know with the way again these elections could go if there's something where you might have to leave for a little bit because it might just be a little bit easier. There were things concerning me, yeah, like hear about like health insurance and things like that. The way that the food is and how over there there's like so many ingredients that are banned that are just in all of our foods. And being in California, they're making steps to like get rid of that stuff, but it's not until 5 years down the road. But it's like, well, we're still gonna be consuming all these different dyes and additives until then. Um, and then yeah, so I kind of wanted to do that, and also just to have an extra passport. It makes travel easier because once you get over there, you can travel on your Italian passport. You just tuck your U.S. one away, and it's you just get like treated a little bit better. There was one case where we were just there this summer. I got engaged in Italy. We were celebrating,
Congrats.
yeah, we were celebrating having the passport. So we were actually there for a different wedding, and then we're like, let's pop over to Italy since we're already in Scotland. It's an easy flight. And when we were going to board one of the planes, I was like, well, I'm going to try the passport. I'm going to see how it works. So I got in the EU passport line, and I was the only one in the line, and the entire other line was like stretching super far back. And I was like, oh yeah, this is definitely at least one benefit that I'm already receiving from having this is just not to have to wait in line. Now, granted, my fiance doesn't have hers yet until after we're married, but so I'd wait for her regardless. But it was just fun to try it out and
Yeah,
see
for
how it works
sure.
and kind of test it out. Yeah.
Yeah, plus the fact that you could like retire early there or
Yeah.
buy property and just like live your days, half of the year or whenever you want to just go live there, you can.
Yeah,
So,
and as a filmmaker too, like there's a lot of incentives to film over in Europe. So having this allows me to work there without having to deal with all the visa stuff because I'm now an EU citizen. So any
that's
sort of job opportunities, just like it opened up a whole other workspace of like you said at the beginning was I can now work or live anywhere in the EU. So there's those benefits as well.
amazing. Okay, so
Yeah.
next question I have is like, can people really do this on their own? And how much did you, I know you've already said how much you've saved around like,
Yeah.
5 to even 10K with some of these like legal fees, but what about like how much did you spend?
Yeah, I kept a full like Excel sheet. And I think even I have the a blank version of that. I might have the original one and then the blank version on my I have free files. If you sign up for the mailing list, you'll get this like access to my Google Drive. And I kind of show like and break it down because it's I also used it as a tracker. So it was like on this day I sent this to go get, the Cook County, Chicago birth certificate record. And then I would put when it was received, I put what the fee was. And then I would add in like, okay, what was the postage, envelope? So all said and done, it was just about 1,200 bucks is what I spent. And for me, that was a lot. I think I could have done it like under a grand if I accidentally ordered duplicates of stuff because when I sent one of the requests in when I was still learning how to do this, I was like, oh, I need genealogy documents. And then they sent me back copies, like Xerox copies of the birth certificate, and I need originals. So I was like, oh, don't say it's genealogy. You need an actual like vital records version of it. So I had to order it again and pay the fee again. And then also there was like my whole bloodline thing. My mom was previously married, so there was a divorce, and because she didn't change her name back to her maiden name on her marriage certificate for my dad, it has this other name. So now I had to include those documents and get them translated because there was a whole thing. Any documents that are in English have to get translated, and it's more expensive the longer they are. And like for a divorce, you need to translate the entire like divorce contract thing, which was like 10 pages, like solid 10 pages of a contract, as well as like this notice of no appeal kind of thing. So there was a lot of extra translations that I had to do that other people might not have to do.
Yeah.
And you might even be able to do it less depending how far you removed you are from your ancestor. Because if it's like your parent or your grandparent, that's less documents you have to get than for me, it was my great grandparents. So every layer is another set of documents you have to acquire,
Yeah.
translate, apostille, and yeah.
You did a good job. I mean, that's not too expensive.
Yeah,
Can
no,
we
it was
talk
great. And time
timeline?
wise too was like about I want to say it was like a little like around 2.5 years, maybe a little over that. From the day that I like was like, all right, I'm gonna log into Ancestry, start building this thing to the day I had my passport in hand was about 2.5 years. So
Wow. So
and,
okay,
and that for me was slow because I'm someone that's like, if I'm doing this, I want it now. And sending stuff
yeah.
to the county to get records, especially when you have to send it through the post office and a self-addressed stamped envelope, and you're just waiting for it to come back. There's no way to track it. You're just kind of like, all right, can we move a little faster on this? So
Yeah, no, and I heard that this is like specifically with Italy right now, everybody's trying to do this. So do
yeah.
you have like updated timelines and where do people actually do this? Because I know there's some people that are just diving into this. You do this at a consulate, right? Could you kind of
Yeah.
explain that process?
Yeah, so there's a couple consulates all over the country. So depending what city you're in, there's a consulate that you're assigned to. They're kind of like regions. I was in Los Angeles, so I lucked out. So the consulate was in Los Angeles, like 15 minutes from my house. I was actually on my way to my wood shop, so I'd always pass it, and I was like, oh, that's where I'm gonna have to go when I get this application together. So it was really close. But if you're somewhere else, you might have to like travel somewhere. But yeah, you look online. I have them all listed in the book with like the websites and all that. Um, as for timelines, like that's trickier because they don't give you any information on anything really. Like if you eventually get your appointment date, like you'll kind of have that date. But in terms of like when you drop off the application, you're just waiting. So the way you can kind of reverse engineer this is there's a Facebook group, which is amazingly helpful. I recommend that's like one of the first steps is joining that. And they have Excel or like their Google Sheets, but they're like an Excel sheet of everybody. Like when you drop off your application, you just message the person, and they add you to the sheet. So you see like the day you dropped it off, all your info, like getting it through my grandparents, great grandparents, whatever your path might be. And then you update them when it's like, hey, I heard back and I'm going for my appointment, or I heard back and I have more homework to do, or I got my passport. And you can kind of reverse engineer the timelines that way. So when I was doing it, I think I figured it was about 8 months from when I dropped off my application because I was expecting it to arrive around, yeah, March or May, maybe sometime of the next year. And then I lucked out and met a random friend that knew someone at the consulate, and so he introduced me. And I was like, I don't know how to ask. Like, can you check on my application? And they were like, yeah, sure, I'll check it out. And they're like, you're good to go. Like, I'm gonna put it in right now. So it saved me like months just randomly meeting someone at
Wow.
the
That's
consulate. So that's
crazy.
awesome. Yeah, and a lot of those people, like, if you look at the local, if the consulate's in your town, they do have a lot of like community outreach and like Italian Fest, and they'll be like, hey, I'm gonna be there at this booth, like come meet us. And so you can kind of, meet these people and get to know them so that they're just not like names on the other side of an email. Because when
Wow.
I was doing it, you just drop your application off. But before the pandemic, you'd have to go and sit with a person that would go over your application, you talk through it. Because they got all backed up and you couldn't do in-person stuff, they were still doing that even after the pandemic. I'm not sure if every consulate still is now, so you should check with your consulate to see, is it an in-person appointment or is it just a drop off and wait? The nice thing about the drop off is you don't have to drop it off on that exact date. At least when
Okay.
I was doing it, it was like my date I think was like August 18th, but you had a month before and a month after. So anytime in that window. So the first day that was like available, I was like, I'm dropping it off that day. Just let's
Wow.
get this clock started.
And that
Yeah.
Facebook group, that sounds so helpful. I know you probably don't have the link right now.
Yeah, we can
You
put it in
can,
the show notes, but it's I think it's basically like Italian dual citizenship group. It's something very similar, dual Italian citizenship.
okay.
It's some form of that, but it's the
Amazing.
group on
I know though now the timelines are a lot more than that. Like some people, depending on the consulates, they're like having to wait many years before appointments. Have you heard
Yeah,
about
that
that?
was even the case when I was signing up because one of my friends, the one who I originally started emailing, she was up in Seattle and her consulate was San Francisco. And for me, trying to get the appointment was one of the hardest things. So I do recommend trying to get the appointment locked in as soon as possible, even if you don't have your documents, because like you said, it could be a couple years out. So it's like, well, while I'm waiting for this appointment, I can get the documents. I don't want to like spend a year getting documents and then get the appointment. It's like, oh, now it's another 2 years. You can run down the clock and have those going simultaneously. So for her, she logged on the website and she texted me. She's like, hey, I got my appointment. I'm like, you got your appointment? I've been trying for months to get an appointment because the LA system at midnight Rome time, they would drop the appointment. It was like one or two dates, or it was one date with like one or two slots. And everybody that was eligible for the LA consulate is on there trying to get them. It was like Taylor Swift tickets. It was like you had to get on, the website's going slow. You're like, can I get there first? But it was literally, I think, a couple of months of me trying to do that every day at midnight Rome time. And eventually I got it. But I was like, how did you get it so quickly? I'm like, I don't get it. And she's like, oh, well, it's not for like another 2 years. I was like, oh, okay, I see. Because the LA ones were like 6 to 8 months out. So there was like, it
Wow.
was harder to get, but I had less time to wait because the way they updated their system. But apparently San Francisco at that time didn't update it. So she got an appointment, but it was 2 years in the
Yeah,
future.
that's so interesting. And thanks for sharing that. So I know the only way is not just to go through the consulate. If people are seeing that the timelines are going to be really long until their appointment, they can actually go to Italy and do this as well, right?
Yeah, you can go to Italy and apply in person. And if everything's still the same, you can go to any comune in Italy. It doesn't have to be where your like grandparents were from. So you kind of want to do a little bit of research and see which one has like, a good amount of people there, but it's not going to be too slow of a consulate. Or not a consulate, like main office, municipal office. Also, you want to see where you want to spend time because you might be there for at least a month or two, I think is the timeline. I haven't actually gone that route. I did a little bit of research. And I think to do that, though, you do have to establish residency while you're there. So you'll have to rent like an apartment. I don't know if you can really do it with an Airbnb. So you have to go, tell them, hey, I'm here as a resident, kind of switch over to residency. Um, and then you can start that process. But yeah, it does vary from, place to place. So depending what region you want to spend time in, for instance, if you're going, like, if you're like, I'm going to go spend time in Rome, it's like Rome's going to be swamped. You probably want to go to a smaller city because their office is going to be maybe a little quicker. And in those offices, you're still going through the consulate technically because they're contacting your consulate in the US. It's just that they have a faster pipeline to just call them up and be like, hey, is this all this stuff look good? And they're like, yeah.
Yeah.
So you're over there. But obviously, it's going to cost more to go over to Italy and stay there. So not everyone can afford that. But again, it's a time versus money thing. Do you want to get it quicker or do you want to get it, um, you know, cheaper and to spend more time on it? So.
Yeah, no, and that's really good. And this is great for people like my peeps who are actually wanting to move to Italy. They're actually like doing that and they're going with their American passport and you just enter. And then there's an
Yeah.
extension process where they allow you. So like normally you only get 3 months in the Schengen area because you're doing your citizenship application. You'll have your passport in about 6 to 8 months. And basically, they'll create this like document for you so that you're allowed to stay in the Schengen for longer than 3 months because you're becoming a citizen. So,
Yeah, it's like you get like a little like grace period or like a little
yeah,
extension. Yeah,
yeah,
so you can go longer than the normal US visa.
yeah. So that's a really good one for people. And then, okay, now the juicy part. Like, okay, so
Yeah,
somebody identifies that they have ancestors from Italy.
yeah.
What are the next steps? Like, what do they do? I know you talked about family tree. Like, what do they need to do if they know that they have ancestors from Italy?
Yeah, so for me, it was basically let's look at the family tree. Let's look for any potential like hiccups along the way, which there was potential for one. I lucked out by the way that just the dates worked out. So the thing about Italy is up until 1948, women were not allowed to pass along citizenship. So it was only like the men. So you can only get it from like if your great grandfather, then you go through your grandfather, you know, that sort of thing. And my great grandfather had my grandmother, and I was like, oh man, like I'm probably not eligible because my chain to get to there is my through my grandmother. But luck, and she was born, you know, like way before that. Um, but then I was looking and I was like, oh, but after 1948, my grandma was allowed to pass it along. So my mom luckily was born in 1953. So that means by the time my mom was born, my grandma was eligible to pass it along to my mother. Now, her sister, the aunt that I was getting all the information from, she was born before 1948. She's the oldest sister. So like her kids, like my cousins, would not be eligible. They'd have to go the 1948 route through the lawyers in Italy. I was able to go through the consulate just through the bloodline.
Interesting. Okay, so just to clarify for folks, when you had the maternal ancestor that came, that was that the direct line to you that was born before 1948, you're gonna have to go through typically a lawyer to the judicial system. They now have to do a court case in Italy on your behalf. And that's
Yeah,
where,
if that breaks the chain, yeah, then it'll be
right,
different.
okay, got it. Now,
Yeah.
how do people like know if they qualify? So I know this is one of the caveats was the
Yeah, so in
1948.
the book, I have a whole flow chart where it's like a yes, no. It's like, do you have a relative that's born here? Yes. Okay, go down to this part. Okay, were they born before this date? No. Okay, you're getting like, and it kind of like walks you through it a little bit. But yeah,
Cool.
like the biggest thing is yeah, looking for all these weird little caveats. Like, there's also the whole thing of naturalization. Like, so had my great grandfather brought over my grandma from Italy even if she was born the same dates and he brought her over, but then he naturalized while she was a minor, she would lose her citizenship because back then, if you were naturalizing, you had to renounce your citizenship, and all of your minor children by de facto lost theirs as well. But luckily, she was born in the US. So by being born here, she had US citizenship and Italian citizenship. And because she wasn't acquiring US citizenship, she was born that way, she was given both. And then when he became a citizen, it didn't pass on to her. It didn't, you know, cancel out hers because she was getting citizenship through a different route. She wasn't naturalizing. She was born here. Now they have recently, in like a couple months ago, changed this policy. So, for instance, my cousin, a different cousin who actually has, it's the like his uncle, like my uncle, his dad actually is still eligible, even after because he was born after the 1948 rule. But because of this new rule, he can't go to the consulate. He's got to go through a lawyer because now they're treating any minors, whether you're born here or Italy, when the parent naturalized, they're just saying the kid naturalized too. That's if you go through the consulate. That's what they told all the consulates to follow this rule. But if you go through a lawyer and do it in Italy, you can go that route. But unfortunately, it's going to cost more money. So that's I don't know. Like I know that the 1948 cases cost around 5,000, 5,500. If you do have that, that's what one of my friends that was going that route. She asked me all the info, and I was like, oh, unfortunately, you know, you're gonna have to go this way. And she's like, I'm like, here's the lawyer that someone recommended. Check them out. And she said they're awesome. And this is the price. And I was like, yeah, this is the price that that guy said. So that it's pretty consistent to be around, I think, 5 to 6 grand to do that. But
Okay.
it's much faster. Like she doesn't have to wait, you know, the years for the consulate to go through all their appointments. She gets to go in Italy through the courts, and it'll go much quicker. So.
Nice. So that's really interesting. So the naturalization piece, um, even if like they weren't a minor and they were born in the US and they just the grandparent, for example, decided to naturalize in the US and get rid of the Italian citizenship, as long as they were an adult, it's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, but the caveat is you got to look at their the year that they naturalized, because in Italy, and the dates, there's so many numbers, the dates escaping me, but up until a certain age in Italy, you were a minor up until 21. So even if you're like, oh, look, they were 19 years old when my great grandfather naturalized, so they're not a minor. It's like, well, they were a minor up until a certain time, and then it went from 21 to 18. So that's why I'm saying there's all these little like nuanced caveats where
Mm.
you really got to look at the details and see like, am I fully? Because I've had a lot of ups and downs where I was doing the research and I was like, oh, I'm not eligible. I was like, wait, I think I read that wrong. I am eligible, and like just this emotional roller
Wow.
coaster of just yeah. So triple check your work and make sure you know all the dates and everything.
Now,
But yeah,
how did you know? Because I know you're like doing it on your own. How did you for sure know that you qualified? Like, did you run it through other people? Did you have other people like check it as well to see if you were eligible? Because the worst thing in my eyes would be you think you're eligible, you're doing it by yourself, and then you like get all these documents and you do your application and they're like, you're not eligible.
you're not eligible at all. Yeah. So what I my strategy, and this is what I talk about in the book, is before you go buying any documents, there's a step in between the ancestry and acquiring all your documents. So what I did was my goal was like I got to make sure these documents exist and I can get them because I don't even know like what if I go to like the courthouse and they're like, yeah, we don't really have a record for that. I was like, there's got to be a record for it. So what I did was first I went through family to see what documents they had them just text me photos. And then I would go on Ancestry, and Ancestry has a lot of documents scanned on there already. So I was finding birth certificates, marriage certificates. So I was basically collecting folders, and I talk in the book how I organized everything on my computer in different file folders for each, you know, great grandmother, great grandfather, paired them up and put them in their own folder, you know, and just had each little line. It was almost like a family tree in the file structure. And so once I had digital copies of everything, I made sure like, okay, here's the dates. Now I also have the document number and the court where that document exists. So when I was able to order the documents, rather than just saying, oh, I need, you know, Palma Messina's birth certificate, I could say, this is the document number. Here's the date it was issued. I literally just sent them a copy of it, like with it. I just included it because I was like, here, it exists. Don't tell me it doesn't exist because I have a copy. And that way I was able to see every single document. It also helps because you can see if there's name discrepancies because I had to get some of those corrected.
Wow.
Yeah, just typos where they flip the letters and the names. And, you know, in Italy, they're kind of sticklers for that stuff depending on your consulate. Some are more chill, some are more sticklers. Some want you. That's where the homework comes in. So you could hand your application, and they go, "Up, oh, this name's flipped or whatever. You got to get this corrected before you know you actually get your
Now, are you
application
talking on
approved."
the
For
USA
instance, like
side? Are you talking the errors with the typos? Those were happening from the USA documents you had to get, like let's say a marriage certificate or like a
yeah.
death
So for instance,
certificate.
my great grandfather's name was Augustino, but everyone called him August. So a lot of his documents just said August as was his first name instead of Augustino. But then his Italian birth certificate says Augustino. So Italy, you know, their government's like, how do we know this is the same person? You got to prove that these are his documents and not some other person. So I had to go and correct them, and then I would show, you know, the U.S. courts. I'm like, hey, I needed to amend this document. Here's his birth certificate that shows this is his real name. Can you fix it? Now, the other key that saves you a lot of money is if you already got that digital version I told you about, where it's just showing, you know, like whether it's a family member that sent it or you found it online, and you see there's an error on it, instead of ordering the one with the error and then ordering a correction, just pay to order the correction because they'll fix it and send you a new one for the same fee. So instead of paying $15 twice, which I did it a couple of times, I ordered the document and I was like, oh, I didn't notice that the A and the O were switched and now it's the wrong one. So I'd order it again.
Yeah,
If I would just put in right away, like, hey, I need a correction on this document, they automatically send you as part of that fee. They correct
yeah.
it and do it. So
Now you're
yeah,
saying they. Are you talking about the
course. Yeah. So
county
like
clerk? Are you talking about the county clerk, like vital
yeah,
records, which has birth certificates? Like you are emailing like vital records of LA or
yeah.
the
Like I was
marriage,
doing it through all my family was pretty much in Chicago, so I was going through there. They don't do anything through email. They don't have any online form. Everything was snail mail, sending a self-addressed stamped envelope. So I'd have to like write like a letter with it explaining exactly what I want. I'd include as much stuff because I wasn't able there to explain it. Couldn't be
right?
there. So if I was living in Chicago, I could. I could walk into the courthouse. And a couple times when I was home for Christmas break or something, I'd be like, I'm gonna go get some documents, and I would just go to the courthouse, and you'd have them that day versus being in LA and just like mailing it out or having my parents run to the courthouse and get it. I had them running around like far too much, but they were great.
Oh, that's nice
But yeah,
that
you can do it in person and you can get them printed out that day. Corrections, they have to send it down to the state capital. So for Chicago, they had to send it to Springfield, and they would mail it. But some of them, if it was no correction and you just needed a copy, they would do it on the spot that day.
Interesting. This is a really big one because like when they moved from like these countries to the US, it's true. My grandpa, his name was Rudolph, but
Hmm.
the spelling is off from his like actual spelling in the Czech Republic to like the US. They've totally butchered it. But the consulate in the Czech Republic doesn't seem to care. So
Yeah,
that's
that's pretty
cool.
cool.
But
Yeah,
that's something that I think people will run into. Okay, can we talk? I know we've said
really quick,
doc.
there's one other thing I'll say about that though.
Yeah.
So when I turned my application in, because the date came up, and then I noticed that the last minute I was like, oh, there's a couple that are messed up. Like I don't want to like hold off my application waiting for this. So I was like, I'm just gonna turn my application in. I included what was called like an affidavit of discrepancies, and you have like the last, whatever relative that's alive kind of fill thing out. So I had my mom fill it out and saying, hey, these are one and the same person, and she marked out the discrepancies. Some consulates accept that, some don't, and make you actually get the documents fixed. But after I dropped my application off, I just got those documents fixed and had them like in my hip pocket in case they were like, hey, you have homework, you got to get these fixed. I could turn around and be like, hey, here they are, they're fixed. Keep it going. Let's keep this momentum up. So yeah, you like if that is a strategy where it's like if you know there's corrections to be made, but you're eligible to turn your application in, just to turn it in and then work on that stuff again while they're processing it and going to give you homework. And all you just have to balance like how long is it going to take to get these documents versus how long is it going to take for them to pull my application off and start reading it. So
Right, and it's also like be over prepared.
yeah,
Like try to find things that they could potentially say in the appointment that might hold up your application, and just make sure you have that, like you said, in your back pocket. So that's
yeah,
smart. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. So wait, we're talking about documents. What exactly does somebody need to bring? Like, I know every case is different, but like the easiest case that's not like 1948 case,
Yeah.
what would they need to have from each person in this line?
Yeah, so for the vital records, you're going to need your own birth certificate and marriage certificate if you're married already and you want to get your spouse's information on file. You'll need your parents' birth, marriage, and if they're deceased, you'll need their birth, marriage, death. Grandparents, however far back you're going, it's pretty much birth, marriage, death for everybody. And then anybody that naturalized, you're going to want to get that. So
Yeah.
those are basically like the cluster of things that you need to show that
And
trace.
how strict were they with the divorce certificates? Because for example, like my parents got divorced when I was 12. I have that just in case.
Yeah,
Did
I
you
mean, you
also
should.
supply those?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really affect if it's after you were born, since you're the one applying. So that shouldn't really matter. Mine was my mom got divorced from her previous husband before I was even born. So again, it was just to prove that, my mom, who she said, like I was like, oh, she's this person, but the marriage certificate says it's this other person. So I had to like show the long route of like, well, that's because she got married and divorced, and she still has this other name. So it added a little layer for me. But if it's after the fact. But again, it never hurts to get it just in case. But usually,
Right.
if it's after anything that would affect you, it shouldn't really matter. Now, if you had a sibling or something that might that was born to like one of them but not the other, like a half sibling or something, that might be a factor. But yeah, it
Interesting.
shouldn't matter. But it never hurts. Again, these documents are usually like $10 to $15 each, so it never
Yes.
hurts to have it. But then yeah, you got to get it translated and apostillated and all that stuff. So
Yeah, for sure. So I requested like three of each just because I'm kind of crazy and I want to make sure I have extra copies.
yeah.
You just request like one official copy for each of those?
Yeah, so what I would do, that's a really important point because whatever you give them, you don't get it back. So my thing was like, my mom's like, oh, I have grandma's birth certificate. I was like, well, if you're keeping that as like a keepsake, like hold on to it. I'll just spend the 10, $15 and get a new one. Because they're gonna keep everything. So as far as the US documents, I just did one of everything just to keep it low. Because again, if you're doing two or three of everything, it's going to cost two or three times as much. Um, but again, like at the end of the day, if you don't live in your consulate area, like I did, like you might have to send everything in via FedEx, and if that gets lost, all of your originals are lost. So you might want to get two, if that's the case.
Right.
But again, to save money, I just got one copy, knowing that they were going to keep everything. On the other side of it, though, is if you're ordering the Italy documents, there's no charge. Apparently, like the U.S. charges for these documents, other countries do not. So when I ordered my Italian documents, I was just like, yeah, give me three copies. So then I'd have an extra one to keep, and if a cousin or somebody needed one, they don't have to like wait because sometimes it took months to hear that to get back. Because again, you're just putting a letter in an envelope, putting a stamp on it, sending it off, and being like, well, we'll see how long this takes to get international snail mail.
That's so interesting. So those Italian documents, that's the other thing I wanted to ask you. How did you figure out, and I'm sure you talk about this in the book, how do people get those Italian documents?
Yeah, so basically, you gotta do some like sleuthing work. So since I had the like marriage and death certificates of my great grandparents that were here in the US, that those documents actually list like where they were born, and you can kind of like backtrack and figure out. And for a while, like so, like I said, my grandfather was from Falconera, and my
Where
grandma
is
on
that?
that's in Calabria.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, and so um, my aunt was telling me like, oh no no no, your great grandmother was also that's where she's from too, and that whole family tree that they had her being from there as well. And I just could not find anything online with that information. And then I don't even remember how I figured it out or where I found it, but eventually I found something that said she was from Rende, and that's where I found her document was the next town over, which had a different, whatever, like a little municipal building that kept track of all their records. So I had to go to them and get her documents from there. So everyone always had this assumption, and I forget if it had to do with because I did randomly, and I don't think I used it for anything, but I did find like the ship's manifest from when they came over from Italy because what we found out was they met on the boat coming over from Italy to the US.
That's
That's where
so
my
cute.
grandparents met. Yeah.
Oh
And
my
I found
gosh.
like the log and it's like, oh, I see both of them checking in and then they met on the boat. So that was
Oh,
pretty cool just to like learn that like family history and stuff. And my aunt had always told me like, oh yeah, they met on the boat, they met on the boat. And I had actual proof now. I'm like, oh, they really did because they were from different towns and
yeah.
that's where we met.
This process
Uh,
is honestly really, really fun. And it
oh
kind of
yeah.
like it sparked so much joy to like find all these documents and like that helped me too a lot was on Ancestry. I found the ship manifest of my grandpa that had a lot of information I didn't have. So
Yeah.
that was really cool because I got to see exactly when he entered the US and I couldn't find that date. Um, Even
Yeah.
on
And
some of those documents, I found the alien number which you
oh,
need for naturalization to request the naturalization document from USCIS. That's where y'all are going to have to go. They're so behind. It's like 12, right now it's 12 months. I put in the
geez.
request in March of 2023
Oh man.
and it's now what is it now? It's November. No, sorry. March 2024 I put in the request and right now it's November 2024. So, yeah,
Crazy.
it's
Mine
crazy.
was literally, I did it during the pandemic, and I remember I was like emailing and wasn't really getting response, and then I just called and someone answered, and I was like, "Oh yeah, I can get it." He's like, "Yeah, I found it for you. Like, just email me your credit card number." And I was like, "Hey, this sounds sketchy," but so I emailed them and put an order in, and then they just mailed it to me. So I got mine like I feel like in like a couple weeks. I was mostly waiting for to hear back from the guy on email where he's like, "Oh yeah,
Wow.
just give me a call or
You
something."
got lucky.
Yeah.
So that sounds a little crazy. You literally just wrote a letter in Italian and sent it to, is it the comune that has the birth certificates in Italy?
Yeah, and I didn't even write a letter. Like I found a form online, which I have a copy again in that like online library that like you can sign up for it. Um, in the book, it tells you where to get like the free document thing. But I have like a thing in there. You just fill it out like of like what you're looking for, all the names of the people. There's one for birth, marriage, and death certificates. So you just fill that out. It's already in Italian, and it has like the little translation, so you know what you're writing. And then you just fill it out and you mail it out there, and yeah, eventually they'll send it back. Like now there's a bunch of different things, and I feel like kind of all of them worked for me. Like people were saying, oh, like slip in like a 5 or 10 or in euros in there, and they'll send it for you just for postage because they got to ship it back. And other people were like, no, no, you got to put a self-addressed stamped envelope, and the only way to do that is because they got rid of the international postage from the post office. So people are buying and selling Italian stamps on Etsy. It's like a whole business of someone will buy like $2 of stamps and sell them for $20 on Etsy because they
No
know people are
way.
looking for them. But I tried a little bit of everything. Like the first one, I threw like €5 in there and it came back. Second one, I did like a self-addressed envelope with no stamp, and it came back. But and they used my envelope, and then I did that again. And the other time, they sent it and just sent in their own envelope with their own postage. So I think really any of them will work. They just kind of get around to it and send the document over.
So you
So
did try without sending money and they sent it back. So that means the government of Italy like paid for your postage to
yeah,
the
yeah, I think yeah, and again, like they don't charge for documents. The things we're used to
so
in the
crazy.
US in terms of paying for everything, like that's not how it is like internationally. Like you can go get vital documents for free if you just walk into like the office and you're like, hey, I want like if you're in Italy, if you have a trip and you're not going to be far from where your relatives are from, you can just detour and go in person and just get these documents so you don't have to like deal with the mail. So, or if you have a friend that lives over there, is studying abroad, or is going on a trip that doesn't mind trying to, go navigate this system and can speak a little bit of Italian for you.
So cool.
Yeah, you can,
Thank you so much for sharing that. But yeah, I love I love this Etsy. That is so creative.
yeah.
Like, cheers to that person who's like now started a business. Wow.
Yeah, and I feel like it's pretty much like I'd always noticed there's like one specific guy that was doing it. So I was like, oh, I was
That
at
is
one point I was gonna do that route, but I was like, I'm just gonna see if this other thing works first,
that's
I guess.
hilarious. Okay,
Yeah.
so you were talking about obviously congrats on your engagement. You're getting
Thank you.
married. Um, let's talk about like bringing your spouse or kids. I know you have a section in your book about this. Um,
Yeah.
how are you guys planning on doing it? And how would this person be able, like, let's say somebody wanted to move to Italy. You obviously, let's say just you and your fiance wanted to move next year, and
Yeah.
you guys got married. You want to permanently live there. So you would move to Italy. You have citizenship, but what happens to her?
Yeah, so basically, once you get married, like a clock starts for 3 years. You have to be married for 3 years before she would be eligible for citizenship. And now that timeline can change though. So, like if we're over in Italy, it gets cut in half. So it's only a year and a half. Now, if we're over in Italy and we have a kid, it cuts down to a year. So there's all these little check marks of things that like make it a little bit quicker, to get that. Now, if you, let's say, I was already married when I did this whole thing, and I've been married for 5, 10 years. If you're someone, you guys have been married for a while, and I got my citizenship, I could have put her on my application so that information would have been in there because the 3 years would have already passed. So it goes from when you got married, not when you become a citizen. Because again, I don't think I mentioned this at the top. Like, you're not actually applying for Italian citizenship. You're applying for your citizenship that you already have to be recognized. And that's a big difference. Like, you're not trying to say, hey, look, I want to be a citizen. You're saying, I am a citizen. Here's the documents that prove it. That's why I was saying it's very important to show that that chain of the bloodline actually continues because it shows that that citizenship has been passed down. You just weren't aware of it, basically.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
so
So,
interesting. So you're saying that because you guys aren't married, the 3 years would have to be, it could be anywhere in the world. Like in
yeah.
the US. Outside of Italy, it would have to be 3 years that you guys are married before she could get the citizenship, and then a year and a half in Italy and 1 year if you guys had a kid.
Yeah, so I was always joking around before we were engaged. I'm like, we should just secretly get married now so we could start this clock. Like while I was doing this process, I'm like, that way we don't have to wait as long for
Yeah.
you. Who knows if they're going to change the laws? Like I said, they just changed that minor law, so who knows
Yeah.
if they're going to change the marriage laws down the road?
There,
Um,
yeah.
yeah,
That's
so
what I
that's
always tell people is like these things are constantly changing. You know, the
yeah,
Sephardic Jewish route, you could have gotten citizenship in Spain if you could prove that your family had come from, the Sephardic lineage from Spain or Morocco, like that whole region. But it's gone now. It ended in
oh wow,
2019. So anybody who
yeah.
like actually has that bloodline, they can't apply it because they've discontinued it. So it's like, I don't know. I feel like people that want to do this, like, please just do it because you will thank yourself later.
Yeah,
Um,
and that was the thing. I was like, I'm like, I might as well have it. I'm eligible for it. Why not just get it? And that's the thing that I was telling family members. Like, none of my other siblings or parents or anyone was like really interested in it. And I was like, but you guys, we have it. Like, so who cares? What are you gonna do with it? I'm like, we can do a lot with it.
yeah,
And he said, like, my cousin was starting the process, and they changed that law, and now he has to go this whole other route that's going to cost 5 times more than what I paid because he's got to go through the lawyers and all that because they changed.
right.
If I would have been starting this now, I would have had to do that same route. It might have discouraged me, like the cost of it, because I would have been like, "Am I going to use it? Can I afford it right now?" But because it was so easy for me to do it myself before they changed that law, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like,
Right.
just get it now, and you'll always have it. You don't have to worry about it. Yeah, I'm always telling my friends, and they're like, "Yeah, yeah, I'll get around to it. I'll get around to it." And people just kick the can on it, and it's down the road, and
Yeah. And the other
changes.
thing I was going to mention is like for those that, well, in the case that if you weren't married for 3 years and you wanted to move to Italy, like right now, normally the partner would have to get, you guys could get like a partnership visa. Uh,
Yeah, there's like
it's
there's a way that she doesn't get kicked out at the 90-day mark of her U.S.
Yeah. So like that's what my husband and I did. So like when I was living in Spain, I was on a student visa and it was starting to get like really expensive because I had blown through all my savings from the US. I was now living like a Spanish citizen, like, or a Spanish resident, right? Like, income wise, like my savings had been gone. And so continuing to renew the student visa was starting to get pretty pricey.
Yeah.
So me and my husband, well, he was my boyfriend at the time, we had been together for like 2 years. Um, and so we did this thing called pareja de hecho, and it's a partnership, like residence permit. And most European countries will allow you to do that. Italy's is pretty strict. You do have to be married. So like Spain though is super relaxed. Like any EU citizen, because my husband actually has a at that time it was the EU British passport. He had been living permanently as a resident in Spain his whole life. So we just did it and we were boyfriend girlfriend. They allow that. The Netherlands also allows that. Like any EU country that anybody that has a passport from any EU country can go essentially to any of these countries that have this partnership um, route, and you can get permanent residency there. So that's something else for people to consider. Italy does require that you guys are married, and then there's like,
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I tell people too, you reminded me of that because you're talking about Spain, is I had a friend of mine, and he was like, oh, he's like, my dad was born in Hungary. I was like, let's look up, let's see if that's in the EU, and it is. And I was like, you should get your passport. It's so easy. It's your dad. He's like, yeah, but I don't want to go live in Hungary. I'm like, dude, it's the EU. Once you get the passport, you can live in any of those countries. He's like, oh, I didn't know that. Like, I'm like, you can live and work in any country once you get it. So I was like encouraging him. So even if it's not Italy and you want to live in Italy, or if it's you only have Italy and you don't want to live there, just get one of your EU passports and then figure out where you want to go after that. But like, it is a key to a doorway that'll like open up all of Europe for you. So I
yeah,
highly recommend that. And if you aren't eligible through descent, in the book, I actually talk about some other ways that you can get it because you can do it through residency. And now they have Italy just launched this year their digital nomad visa because that was really big in Spain and Portugal. People were going there for these digital nomad things. Italy has it now. And so I think Italy, you have to be living there for 10 years to have like 10 years of residency, and then you're eligible for your Italian citizenship through residency. So if you're a digital nomad and you're working from home, you can work from home in Italy, live there for the next 10 years, and then all of a sudden, you're a citizen. So there are other
yeah,
routes. There's also investments if you're super loaded and you want to like invest like $100,000 into stuff over there. Like there's the
right.
golden visa. Like there's all these different ways in. I do touch on those in one of the sections of the book that isn't just the bloodline version. So for
Right.
everybody that wants to go and might have these other routes, like there's not like it's not no hope if you're not actually Italian. There's other routes.
Right. And like, and also for the other people listening that maybe has like other countries descent, there you just really need to look it up because some only allow you to do it through parents. Some do it,
Ireland, like I said, yeah, it was only parents and grandparents.
yeah, and like the ones that do allow like grandparents and sometimes great grandparents are Ireland, the UK, Czech Republic, Poland, Spain. Those are just some to name a few, but like others that are really strict are like France, Belgium, those ones only allow parents. The ones that are really hard to get though is like your friend in Hungary. That one requires a language test.
Yeah, that's what he
And
was like, dude, I have to take a language test. I was like, Duolingo, man, get on
well,
it. Do it.
Hungarian is the hardest language in the
I know.
world.
But I think
And
he grew up
and
around it, so he was sort of familiar with it a little bit. So I'm
okay,
like, dude, you got a little bit of a base there. Like, let's build
right.
on it. But if
But I
that's the
honestly
call,
know a lot of people that have the Hungarian descent and they like I had one friend, she tried to take the classes for 2 years and she gave up. But
yeah.
that's because she has a grandparent that was from Croatia.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
So
she's set. She's set.
yeah.
But
And the other thing I should point out is I forgot to mention this for the spouse. So my fiance, when we do get to that point where she's applying, she doesn't get it automatically. She has to take a language test and pass it at a B1 level. So we've both been studying Italian. She's way better than me because she has like she like minored in Spanish, so it's very similar. Um,
cool.
but she'll have to take a language test and pass that to get it. So it's not just like, oh, you can just get married immediately. There is a test to it. So, but who
Right.
knows? Like, they might start adding stuff down the road where people in the US that are trying to do what I did, they might start requiring a language test for that because they're very into like keeping the culture and the heritage. And they're like, well, if you want to, have the citizenship, you might need to learn. So that's how
It's
some
true.
countries are, like Hungary. Like you have to learn the
Yeah.
language if they want to. keep us
And it
close.
makes sense, right? Like it's
Yeah.
the same thing happens with I talk about this like in my academy a lot is like even if you want to study, like if you want to do the student visa in Italy and you want to do language, they require for the application that you have previously taken Italian classes. Like they don't want just like random people being like,
Yeah, just
"Yeah, I'm
showing
going to
up.
take Italian classes," and then they're just like chilling and doing nothing. They
Yeah.
really want to make sure people are like invested in keeping the culture alive. They're actually trying to like, live there potentially even in the future. So I think it's smart that they are requiring these types
Absolutely.
of things or maybe adding it. But yeah, that is one thing for Italy is they're pretty strict about that's like language courses. Like they want you to like
100%. And one thing I wanted to point out, I forgot to mention it from earlier when you were talking about some countries that only allow like parents or grandparents. I started recently, I'm trying to get my dad to dig up. He has this binder for his side of the family, which is the Irish side, which I told you like I didn't have any info on, and I knew my grandparents weren't from there, and my parents definitely weren't, so I wasn't eligible. But he was telling me, he's like, I think my grandparents were from Ireland. And I was like, well, why don't you pull that binder? You said you have a binder somewhere with the family tree, because the like kind of like backdoor route would be if my dad basically applied right now through his grandparent and then he got his citizenship, then I could go, hey, my dad's a citizen, so I could then now be eligible. Like I'm not eligible right now, but if he gets his citizenship from his great grandfather or his my great grandfather, his grandfather, then it works. You see what I'm saying? It's kind of like you
yes,
have the person above you go back a level, or if your
right,
grandparents are still alive and it's their parent or relative, they can do it and kind of step
right.
ladder down.
So that's what I always tell people for like France because they take parents. Like
Hmm.
if your parent is still alive and it was their parent that came from France, have them do it and then they can pass it on to you and then you
Yeah.
can do it. So yeah, that's another strategy. Don't just give up if like you see it says parent and
Yeah.
then yeah. Okay, what's your like final recommendation for people that really want to do this? Like, do you have any tips for people to follow?
Yeah, I mean, obviously everything I talk about in the book, but I'll just go over a couple things I didn't cover. I'm literally just giving away everything in the book, and by the end of this, they're not going to need it, but I still
No.
like. But one of the things that was insanely helpful was this website called FamilySearch.org.
Oh wow.
It's completely free. It's kind of I found a bunch of documents on there. It's run by the Mormon Church. I found out because they when they are on their missions, they gather documents in all these cities, and kind of like they have this giant library. So I was looking through, found someone that recommended that site. And I was like finding some documents, and they had scans of things on there that I couldn't find anywhere else. And then there were some documents that it was like, oh, this is only available in the library. And I was like, oh my, what am I have to drive to Salt Lake to this massive library? And it was like, oh no, there's like an LA branch, but it was COVID, so it was closed. And I was like, oh man, I got to wait till after the pandemic to get into this library. And I went to their website and it was like, oh no, you can Zoom with the librarian and they'll help you like anything that is only available in the library, they'll look up for you. So I sat with like logged on, this librarian came out, I told him what I was looking for, and we sat there looking for my great grandfather's death certificate for like 2 hours. He was going document by document because we knew the year and we just didn't know when it was filed, but we knew the year. So we are just going through trying to find them. And they're sort of in order, but not always. And we're clicking through because I knew the date that he died, and we're like not finding anything. And then he's like, hey, I got to go to a meeting and stuff. I was like, dude, that's fine. I like totally took up way too much of your time. He's like, I can jump back on in about a half hour if you want to keep going. I was like, no, I mean, dude, you've been so kind. I appreciate it. So I let him go. And then a day or two later, he emailed me. He's like, hey, I found that document for you. Like he went and like looked it up. Like after the fact, he kept looking for it for me. And I have some friends that I told that story recently. They're Mormon. They're like, oh yeah, the people that work at the library, like that is like their mission. They get so much fulfillment finding documents for you. So like, don't be
Oh,
shy about asking them for stuff. And it was just cool. I was just hanging out with this old dude like who was just a librarian, and he was at home like in his house. He wasn't at the library, so we're just zooming and he's finding documents and stuff. So highly
that is
recommend that.
so cool.
FamilySearch.org.
What a great tip. And I know you obviously can't share everything from your book and I mean we've learned so much here, so thank you so much for coming on. Can
Yeah.
you tell us how people can purchase your book and even get in contact with you?
Yeah, so the book is on Amazon. Just search for Dual Italian Citizenship Handbook or just Dual Italy Citizenship. Any of those keywords, it's going to pop up. You'll see my lovely fiance on the cover
Holding
holding
up
my
two
passport.
passports.
Yeah, holding the passports. We're doing a lot of photos in Italy like this with the book. Yeah, so just find the book on there. I tried to keep it cheap, because I was like, if you're like me and you're trying to do this yourself, I just wanted a really cheap and easy book to read. It's I did it myself, so if there's typos or anything, just email me. There's an email in the back of the book. Let me know. Always appreciate that. And yeah, I'm on Instagram and TikTok. I don't post on there a ton, just because I have like other stuff going on. But I think it's Dual Citizenship Handbook on both of those. You can just find every now and then I just throw up some videos and stuff just to put some stuff out there. But yeah, a lot of times, mostly my Instagram is me posting, like reposting stories of other accounts that are showing cheap Italy houses where I'm just like, oh my God, this is only 90,000 and it's like just outside Florence. Like, check this house out.
Wow.
But yeah, if you're and follow all of those like cheap Italian property. I don't remember all the names of them, but it's those type of accounts that just literally post, hey, here's some real estate that you might want. And you're like, oh man, what are we doing here? Like these homes are so cheap. Why am I here?
Yeah. And I'm actually putting the link to all of that in the show notes. So make sure to go to the description and you can get the book as well as stay connected via social.
Yeah.
So
It's
cool. Well,
available in ebook, paperback, and hardcover, whatever your preference is. So,
nice. Thank you so much for like
yeah.
all of the gems you just shared with us. Like this is incredible and I'm sure people are like, "Wow, you really gave us a lot here and people are going to really appreciate this." So,
Yeah, absolutely. And enjoy your time in Italy when you get there. That's the goal, right?
yeah. Well,
Wow.
thanks so much and we'll see you soon, Bill.
All right. Thanks again.